Our next speaker is Dr. George Mundy, who is going to discuss equine injuries. Dr. Mundy is the Keeneland Racing Safety Officer and is serving as the interim equine medical director for the Kentucky Horse Racing Commission. I'd just like to add a word. I worked with Dr. Mundy at the quarter horse meet at Sandy Ridge on the Red Mile last year or this year, and was very pleased with what he's been able to develop in working with the regulatory veterinarians and the horsemen and examining veterinarians across the country where I've been a steward, linking the equine injury database information with pre-race testing information, exams. George has done, and it really gives you a benefit of seeing what the horse used to be having problems and what the current problems may be, and linking the two of them together. And it also involves coordinating the horses that have appeared on a vet list. Put that information together. So he'll probably talk about that, but George Mundy.
I'm going to take the microphone here, if I can. Thank you, Dan, for that great introduction. And thank you to the advisory committee for giving me the opportunity to join into this conference with what I'm calling the ground level safety team. And that's all of us in this room, the veterinarians, and it's all about safety and the safety journey. So off the top, I'd like to say I've been doing this for a long time. And I say, if we knew then what we knew now, how much further ahead we'd be in the area of equine safety. So what I'm hoping to do in the time we have together is to bring everybody up to where we are now and the history of that, and then hope that we can make as much progress in a shorter time going forward. Hope you can see the screens. It's been talked about, but the subject is equine injuries, but in reality, I'm going to focus on the fatality, and that is the race day fatal fracture is the extreme of the equine injury. And we've also touched on what that means to thoroughbred racing. In fact, it is what threatens the future of thoroughbred racing from a social license standpoint. But that is the fatal fracture is our nemesis. And so that leads us to safety. And I call safety, equine safety, as a code word for no more fatal fractures. So what I'm going to start with is what I hope that everybody goes home with, and that is some facts in your toolbox. The first fact is every horse is at risk of the fatal fracture. The second is the majority of fatal fractures are previous injuries, equine injuries. And the third is lameness is the horse's primary indicator of injury. When it's all said and done, this is the take-home message. And there it is. Every horse is at risk of a fatal fracture. The majority of fatal fractures are previous injury, pre-existing. And lameness is the key to getting to the bottom of it, to mitigation. So what I'd like to cover today, in today's update, these 4 areas. Let's get up to speed on what we know factual about equine injuries. What are we doing about identifying injuries and eliminating fatal fractures? What do we know about the cause of fatal fractures? And finally, what directions are we pursuing to better identify injuries? You see my theme of 1990 for a lot of reasons. That's the year that I took the position as a regulatory veterinarian in Kentucky. So the safety journey began with me at that point and has progressed through the decades to where we are today. So back when I started in 1990, we would have a fatal fracture during racing, catastrophic injury. And I said, you know what? How often does that happen? And when I asked that question, there was really no good answers. So at the time, if you don't know the answer to a question, what do? Let's do a study. So that's what we embarked on. And we looked at some information from around the world, and there really wasn't that much information as to how often does this happen. So we decided then to say, let's define the situation. So we defined it as when the equine ambulance responds during the running of a race is a situation, and then what's the outcome of that? So that's initial study we did in 91, and that was our case definition. And so if the ambulance run resulted in a catastrophic injury, which we now define as a fatal injury, you can see it in the literature, but that was our case definition. And then in 2007, under Dan Fixwatch, the Jockey Club initiated the Equine Injury Database. So we'll do a little bit of a deep dive into both of these things. The information in the graph is we are only looking at racing fatalities. So this is the metric. So again, when I just digress, we're looking at metrics. So we're saying how often does it happen? So this is an incidence, and we've made a very succinct case definition. And the definition is an ambulance run, and what's the result of that during races? And so the subdivision, as I'll point out here, the fatalities are in 2 categories. One would be non-musculoskeletal, and the other would be musculoskeletal, so that's self-explanatory. So a catastrophic musculoskeletal is a fatal fracture. So we were able to get some good incidents, and at the time, you say, how often does it happen? Well, it was 0.14% was our numbers. So in Japan, where they were chronicling this, they decided to use the metric of per 1,000 starts. So that's when the incidents came up of how often does it happen based on the number of starters. So again, this is racing only. So that started back in the 90s, and it has moved forward to being the #1 metric of racing fatalities per 1,000 starts. So back in our initial study, that number was in Kentucky, through an 18-month period of 35,000 starts, it was 1.4 per 1,000 starts. So I just blew this up, and I know it's hard for you to see, but this is the last 4 years, and this is Kentucky. So this is what is presented to the Racing Commission at the Racing Commission meetings. And this has been metriced in Kentucky since 2007, when the equine injury database was put into place. So you can see the way that Kentucky metrics it, the fatality is, again, non-musculoskeletal or musculoskeletal, and it's a fatality, and it's by month. So it's not actually by race meet, but it's by month, as we're moving from track to track in periods of time throughout the year. So this, again, goes back 20 plus years in Kentucky. And I just thought it was interesting when you look at this, and again, I know it's hard for you to see. We had a very, very good year when I go right to the number, which is musculoskeletal fatalities and per 1,000 starts. It was 0.82, which is the best number we've seen ever. And then the following year, it's 1.38. And if you recall, that's what I said, our initial study was back in the 90s was 1.4. And then you can see how through July, what our number looks like now on the metric of again, the race day fatal fracture per 1,000 starts. And a lot of the information that you see coming out now, even with HISA, when they're doing the fatalities, the race ones are based on per 1,000 starts. So that metric is, through the decades, is a number one parameter of how often it happens and how things are going. But at some point, and I can tell you when it was, there were 2 racing jurisdictions that metric fatalities as they occur, and it's public information. One is New York and the other is California. So in 2012 actually is when I've put the finger on it. There was a spike in fatalities, and so then we went from just race fatalities to total fatalities. So that, again, any fatality was metriced or was thrown into the count. So it went from an incidence per 1,000 starts, which was only races, to fatalities, a fatality count that could happen anytime. So it expanded it from that metric that we'd been keeping track of to all of a sudden what I'm calling a fatality count or a body count. So going back to information from California that they'd been metricing over the years, and these are total fatalities. So that includes training. So again, we've gone from a very specific metric to expanding that to what I'm calling a body count. And it turns out that fatal fractures were equally represented in training and in racing, and these numbers continue to be consistent no matter the jurisdiction and across the country. So once it became a fatality count, all of a sudden it was a score. Again, we could, an incidence is a number, but a count is actually a body count. And that's when social media and the relevance heighten the fatality as being the essential metric that's driving things. So when we look at the combination of the two, I go back to 1990, that year of 1990 is when California instituted the mandatory postmortem examination program. And that program dictated by regulation that every fatality on every racetrack would undergo a postmortem examination. So that's capturing all fatalities. And out of that, over the years, when I say distribution, I'm talking about the specifics of those fatalities. It turns out that 85% of the fatalities, fatal fractures, had evidence of pre-existing injury. And that simply said that when the bones had pathological examination, there was evidence of healing fractures, basically callus. And also 50% of the fatal fractures involve the fetlock. So again, we'll circle back to that. So that is the ankle, of which the horse has 4. Keep that in mind. So this slide puts it all in perspective. The total fatalities then, two buckets. One is non-musculoskeletal. So 15% of the fatalities were in that bucket. And so that would be sudden deaths, illnesses, that would even be pneumonias, colics, those type of things, and accidents. The other 85% of fatalities involve the musculoskeletal system. And of those fatalities that involve the musculoskeletal system, 85% of those showed pre-existing injury or pre-existing injuries or calluses. And 50% of those fatalities involve the ankle or the fetlock. And so I think those type of metrics are, you need to keep that in the back of your mind. And I'll tell you this, over the years since 1990, these numbers are extremely consistent. Looking at Kentucky, for instance, last year and this year, again, as they add up, you can pick any point in time, and this is the distribution. This is on a yearly basis, but you can take any jurisdiction, and it always falls within these parameters very, very closely. And that is a slide, an X-ray of the ankle joint, the fetlock joint. And I just want you to see, this is the most common, is the condylar fracture. So I think we can see that triangle of bone there and the displacement, and that's the bottom of the cannon bone in the fetlock. So we've learned that very quickly. As I said, the horse has four fetlocks, 4 ankle joints. And so the process that's going on is in that. And so the definition of a fatal fracture in the fetlock, we call that fetlock failure because there are numerous bones involved in the fetlock. So just keep in mind as we go forward, the focus on the fetlock. I've stated it before, pre-existing pathology is previous injury. So that's not a big surprise, but it's a revelation that it actually was there. It was previously there. So now I come to say, what's the cause of the fatal fracture? And it is something called bone stress injury. So I think it's really, really important that we all understand that process of bone stress injury. Bone stress injury is it's straightforward when you think about it. It's called repetitive stress injury, similar to carpal tunnel syndrome. The repetitive nature of an action leads to stress, and then leads to injury. And the particulars of the thoroughbred training protocols, which is miles and miles of galloping for conditioning, and then the speed event as part of the training process, is very, it's a protocol, and it leads to the progression of and propagation of injury. That's just part of the process. And the other thing to take home is that when there's injury, lameness is associated with that injury. So we'll do a little more deep dive into that. There's two events in people that are similar to this process in horses. One is actually, it was probably in the 20s that the marching soldiers, the marching formation and putting the miles on, it documented of this bone stress injury in military marching. And the other analogy is in long distance or marathon runners. So the process that we go through is parallels the process of training and racing and thoroughbreds. My digital media consultant who put this together for me is put a selfie in here, but he actually did a marathon in LA yesterday. So I think we can all identify with the analogy or the parallel of the marathon runner and the process of bone stress injury. So in the middle is the pain associated with the process. And it goes from little injury, however you can define that, but in people it's expressed as pain. And these are the depiction of that process. So the earliest detection would be a dull ache 1 week after a race. And it progresses to the point that it can be pain during exercise that doesn't go away with rest, to the point that your decreased joint use and pain with just normal movement. So pain in people equates to, in the horse, lameness. In the fatal fracture progression, it's very specific in the horse, in the order and the sequence of events. Step one is the stress reaction. And that could be the very first time a 2-year-old goes out and gets galloping. And even though it's just galloping, there is bone stress reaction. So it's a give and take. The bone gets stressed, then it needs to react to it and basically heal. Or what we're trying to do as we're training is to make that bone strengthen in relation to the stress that it's being put upon. That's what's going on. So the first is an injury, and it's at the cellular level. And at the cellular level, again, there's pain, which shows up in lameness, but it's not detectable. It's only really detectable by an MRI, where you can actually see. It's like hitting your finger with a hammer and you're bruised. That's what happens to the bone, but you can only image it on an MRI. And guess what? That's the slightest of an injury, but actually it's the easiest to heal. So recognition that it's bone bruising and stress, that's easy to fix. It's called time, and it heals 100%. But let's say we progress beyond that. So that initial bruise would be an ache to a horse, so it might be 2 days after a work until they're good again. And then you go to the next step. So the progression then is an injury at a macroscopic level. So the bone injury at a macroscopic level takes more advanced imaging to diagnose that. Specifically, the MRI can do it also. And that's where the PET scan that we know now that has been in the last 4 years very prominent, that can be imaged. So again, and actually nuke scans also. So if it goes beyond that, we actually have a complete fracture, and those complete fractures are detectable on X-rays. So it actually takes, you have to be very far into the process to actually have X-rays to tell you what's going on. And of course, a complete fracture then is what I've showed you on the X-rays, and then the extreme is the catastrophic fracture, of which it's not repairable, and it's it's unstable. Summarizing then, the condylar fracture. This is a condylar fracture. And this is again, the progression from, and I think it's hard for you to see, but on the far right is the lameness. So you have a progression of lameness with each of the levels. We have a progression of imaging that it takes us to diagnose that. So again, at the extreme, it doesn't take any diagnosing. The fatal fracture, the open fracture. But in between, it's much more challenging. But the key to all of it from start to finish in people is the pain, in horse is the lameness. So now let's interject and say, what are we doing about, what's our approach to mitigation or approaching the problem? Our approach is, the veterinary approach is what I'm calling risk modeling. And it's from the two major studies that I've already told you about. The first one is from the postmortem examination program. Now its maturity is 34 years of information, over 8,500 necropsies. And I'm here to tell you, we do not need any more fatalities to tell us what's going on. And the other is from the Equine Injury Database that again got started in 2006. So there's more than 14 years worth of information, over almost 5 million starts, and over 150,000 horses making those starts over the years. That information has been collected and forms the basis for our approaches, our veterinary approaches. So from the California program, the pre-existing pathology angle, which we've established, that is the cause of which is bone stress injury. What we're looking for or using is to identify lameness. That's our number one use of this information, is to identify lameness and do something about that lameness before it progresses to the extreme. And from the Equine Injury Database, some very, very good information has come out. For instance, things that we know about now. When you think about it, a 4-year-old first-time starter. So you know that something must have happened to that horse along the way, that it's taken him that long to actually show up to be a starter. And our number one culprit would probably be bone stress injury pre-existing. So that sucker is a red herring when he shows up at your racetrack, as to, you got to get to the bottom of him, because he's in the highest risk category. And that's the basis for, as we'll talk about, the HISA regulations and the HISA approach to the problem. So that's what it's all about. The veterinary safety protocols is to identify the lame horse. And basically what I say is, prove to me that that horse is lame and it's not because of bone stress injury. Tell me that he's got a foot abscess and we take care of the foot abscess and then we're good to go. But anytime there's a lame horse, you have to prove to me that it's not at some point in the progression of bone stress injury on the way to a fatal fracture. So that's what all of our safety protocols that we do each and every day are based on identifying the lame horse and doing something about it. On the left side are what I've put in the realm of race day veterinary protocols. And these are now nationwide under HISA. They're regulations. On the right-hand side are training veterinary protocols, because as I alluded to at the beginning, part of the propagation is the high-speed event or the high-speed furlong. And there's two definable situations where that is. One is a race, and the other is an official timed workout. So I liken that to you're going to the airport and you're getting on an airplane. And so our safety protocols are basically TSA prior to you getting on an airplane. That's the whole idea of our safety protocols is veterinary intervention prior to a high-speed event when the fatal fracture, when it occurs. So that's the whole approach to our veterinary safety protocols. So again, on race day, I've alluded to the HISA 2000 series rules, our rules. And, but that's augmented by both state rules and house rules. And as we know what a house rule is, and that's when the track says, in order to train or race at my racetrack, you shall do whatever, and you shall be in compliance. So there's 3 levels of rules or regulations or safety protocols that can be implemented. In California in 2019, when the spike of injuries happened there, it was a combination of all those that overnight these safety protocols were put into effect by emergency regulation, state regulation, but mainly by a house rule that said, everybody signed on and said, if you want to be here, then you shall abide by these safety rules. So I wanted to update you or give you the reality of Kentucky and our veterinary safety protocols today in the state of Kentucky. It's everything that I've talked about, and I apologize only that it's probably hard for you to see. When I said race day, from the line up is race day. and they are, all the race day are under HISA protocols performed by regulatory veterinarians. And they include the pre-race exam. It's mandatory. Every horse that competes undergoes a regulatory pre-race examination in the barn area, which includes palpation and a jog up. And then we also monitor all horses during the warm-up in the post-parade, again, as a lameness checkoff. but also mandatory under HISA is what's called post-entry screening, where a lot of those parameters that I talked about from the equine injury database, for instance, one of them is a trainer change. So when you think about it, that kind of makes some sense that when a horse changes hands, the training regime, all other things, the familiarity with the horse, but that is actually a risk factor. So what happens is all the different risk factors after the horse is entered, it's mandatory that we do a post-entry screening of information, pertinent information on each and every horse that is entered to run. So when we look at the training population, in Kentucky right now, believe it or not, we have 5 accredited racetracks that race throughout the 12 months at different times. And there's 2 sub-training centers affiliated with the tracks. Keeneland has one where there's over 800 horses currently training, and Sports Spectrum here with Churchill, where there's about 600 horses, I believe. Jamie, how many at Sports Spectrum? About 500. So when we collectively look today at the training population of thoroughbreds in the state of Kentucky, it's conservative at 4,500, but we also have training centers, layup centers also throughout the state. So it's much higher than that. So today in Kentucky, our at-risk population, remember slide number 1, all horses are at risk of fatal fracture. We have a working population of 4,500 horses. And at our facilities, the racetracks have veterinarians employed, which I'm calling Racetrack Veterinarians Association veterinarians, which are technically regulatory veterinarians that are monitoring training. And what we're monitoring training for is lame horses each and every day. And at every racetrack in Kentucky, it's a requirement under house rule that prior to a high-speed event, a published time workout, that their attending veterinarian practitioner do a jog up on that horse prior to that horse working. So we've inserted by house rule that that a veterinarian examines the horse prior to that horse getting a time speed workout. And so you see, these are the official time workout, TSA, right? Racing up here, HISA takes over to get cleared starters. Official time workout, the safety protocols in point in order to do the time workout. But the other thing in Kentucky by regulation and California and New York, when you enter a horse to run, the attending veterinarian, again, the practitioner must do an examination prior to entry. So again, that's a regulation in 2 states and a house rule in New York. So we have mandatory insertion of another safety protocol on our way up the ladder. So now what are we doing about identifying the lame horse, and what directions are we going in that regard? So I'm putting it into 2 broad areas. Horse level analytics is divided it into 1, the diagnostics and lameness metrics. And under that is wearable technology. and what I'm calling digital recognition. So a deep dive a little bit more into that. This depicts, it's called the SLEP app. So that's actually an iPhone that is recording the horse jogging, and that is uploaded and analyzed for gait analysis, basically. I'll just show you a deep dive on that. So this is what shows up. So this is available to trainers, other jurisdictions, international jurisdictions. I know of a horse that was going to run in Japan, or was entered, that they required a SLEP app analysis to be submitted to them. And it's very simple. You see what it was, you just jog the horse up, boom, it gets uploaded, and then you get an analysis of that horse. And it's also libraried. And I know jurisdictions that are using this as part of the vets list metric. So when a horse is on the vets list for lameness, the SLEP act monitors that lameness, or is the basis for the horse getting off the vets list. The other technology is a wearable. It's actually a wearable sensor, and in that there's 3 different sensors that get put on the horse, and the horse is jogged, and that information, they're actually accelerometers, so that information is uploaded and then analyzed to characterize the forces and disparity and asymmetry. And a lot of this is diagnostic of lamenesses. So a lot of these aren't detectable by sight, and the degree of lameness has to be at a certain level to be detectable by the naked eye. But with this technology, it's quantifiable, and therefore it can be serially utilized to either diagnose or progression of lameness. And in one jurisdiction that I know of, Singapore, I believe, they use this technology on all starters. So the race day horses, before they go to the paddock, they get this done. Again, looking for lameness. And that's diagnostics. Now we're looking for detecting lameness. The wearable sensors, again, the accelerometers, is the stride safe, where that wearable sensor is put in the saddle towel, and that information is uploaded and analyzed and logged. I've put in the VetCam system, which is straight video. This is what Keeneland calls we have 21 cameras. They're actually surveillance cameras, security surveillance cameras, but they're actually almost broadcast quality. And those cameras are strategically located where you can, in real time, observe horses and zero in on them. So instead of having to have veterinarians trackside during training hours observing, this gives us the ability to have numerous cameras in different areas, but also to be able to drill in and do studies, and it's purely video. It's also utilized at various racetracks for the warm up in the post parade. That we use it for that also. That when the horses are warming up, we can zero in on horses and capture that, and you can view it, but we can also broadcast it. At Keeneland, we have an internal house channel that regulatory veterinarians can go to, and again, you can see it in real time, live, horses warming up, and another set of eyes to document that or pick that out. And again, at other racetracks, they dedicate a broadcast camera that they will radio to and say, I want to see the 3-horse, for instance, that in the warm-up, then they will zero in on the 3-horse and it will be broadcast so that the regulatory veterinarian can see that and then make communication to the veterinarian that's on the track, for instance, to make a call in the warm-up. So that's real-time video. And it is all recorded also, by the way. So we have the ability to go back to that and substantiate or to document in real time and archive. And one of the most exciting things I've heard is what this First Racing is doing in their Racehorse 360 suite. There's a subset of it is called track optics, and virtually they're using the same cameras that Keeneland uses, which is a 4K camera, and they've added what I'm calling digital analysis, developing algorithms for key points on the horse and capturing those and analyzing those. So not only do you have the visual, but you actually have a for lack of a better, AI, digital AI, face recognition, same technology that data points on horses. So is that normal for a horse? And have the ability to go back on that particular horse in the archives and see if there's a change to that, which again is going to be huge for us because it throws in the AI to throw a horse into a bucket that needs more scrutiny to be looked at. And again, this is real-time stuff we're talking about, which is really, really exciting. And the last thing I wanted to talk about, ongoing directions, is the injury spike. And I think everybody realizes the significance of that, because as we're developing these metrics, the question is, when is there a problem? And I've put in here the dashboard, the fatality dashboard, as I've talked about. So is this time last year at this racetrack, what was it and what is it now? And is all fatalities? But again, the driver of these is the race day fatal fracture. Because racetracks, again, your dashboard might be telling you something's going on, but really when it comes to fruition is that race day fatal fracture. And that drives the bus on the spike. About the injury spikes, so that's the first thing. When do you know you have a problem? So that comes back to the metrics. But the other step in the injury spike is what I'm calling it's very simple. It's called a racetrack-based safety reset. So when you think you got a spike, it's a flag on the play, and you just go back to the checklist from start to finish and say, what are our protocols and what are we doing, and is everybody doing it? That's the first place you start. And then the next thing is that we've realized and is in place. Give you examples of racetracks that as a result of injury spikes, you have to have what I'm calling a real-time mitigation action plan. So you do the reset, but you also have to be in a position to say, you know what? We need to move our race meet. We need to cancel racing when it rains. whatever the mitigation is, that action plan has to be at the ready. Because that has made a difference, as we've seen in a short period of time. So going back to recent injury spikes, and as I reiterated before, every one of the injury spikes, guess what? The fetlock failure is the major part of the spike. So it's evident to me that, and I hope you take this home too, is from the metrics that I've said, if 50% of our problem is fetlock failure, if we could eliminate fetlock failure, then 50% of our problem would be gone. And if 85% of our fatal fractures are pre-injuries, so we should be able to prevent those, then 85% of our problem would be gone. And I think that's attainable. I know that's attainable, especially in the directions that we're going. So to me, I'm calling the fetlock is the canary in the coal mine, all right? When our protocols are in place and we're experiencing an injury spike and it's fetlock failure, that's the thing where we sit back and declare war and say, what do we have to do further? And again, the gathering of information, the metrics, the AI are going to really, really help us going forward. Take home message across the top for your toolbox: fatal fracture, 85% were pre-injuries, and lameness is the key. And lameness is the horse's gift to us. Thank you.